Maybe that sound never existed there. But on one side, there's the highly popular and controversial series of recent years, and on the other, a horrifying real-world camp with unbelievably striking similarities to Squid Game. The conspiracy theory is whether the series was inspired by a terrifying real-life event or not. This week, we will uncover the horrifying secrets of this hellish camp and witness unbelievable details of the story. So if you're ready, let's begin. In the 1980s, South Korea was experiencing a period of major economic growth after the War of the 1950s, which divided the Korean peninsula into North and South. The country worked to heal the wounds of the past and achieved remarkable progress. It was determined not to lose this momentum. The entire nation was in great excitement as the 1986 Asian Games and the 1988 Seoul Olympics approached. The government, accelerating its efforts to rebuild the country's image, aimed to attract foreign tourists and showcase South Korea's prosperity and remarkable advancement compared to communist North Korea. But behind the curtain of this economic miracle, known as the miracle of the Han River, unimaginable dark and bitter realities were hidden. In April 1981, a letter was sent to the office of then Prime Minister Nam Duck-woo. This letter, handwritten by then President Chun Doo-hwan, a general who had seized power a year earlier through a military coup, ordered officials to take immediate and serious measures to prevent begging and enforce strict policies against street vagrants. With the goal of preparing for the 1986 Asian Games and the 1988 Olympics, the South Korean government implemented a policy to cleanse the streets. From that moment on, nothing would be the same. Under these regulations, which permitted the arbitrary detention of vagrants, social welfare centers were established, and in major cities like Busan, buses labeled as vehicles for transporting vagrants could be seen. The government was rounding up people from the streets as if they were stray dogs. The social welfare centers, which were mostly private, received government subsidies based on the number of people housed there, a kind of commission. This system created a strong incentive for the owners of these centers to round up as many people from the streets as possible. But it wasn't just the institution owners who benefited from these commissions. Police officers also received payments for each person they arrested and sent to these centers, effectively cleansing the streets. The commissions they earned this way often exceeded their monthly salaries. It is said that homeless individuals, disabled people, especially orphan children, and even ordinary citizens who were randomly asked for identification on the streets and failed to provide it were all aimlessly arrested and sent to these centers, just so authorities could collect more commission. If you got caught, there was no chance of avoiding it. Even if you resisted, you would be taken there by force, beaten, and dragged away. This was how, in the 1980s, a dark era of oppression and brutality began in South Korea. But among the dozens of detention centers, there was one that would later become the main inspiration for the story of Squid Game, shocking the world with the sheer scale of the crimes and horrors that took place within its walls. Han Young-soon was one of the victims of this policy. Along with his sister, he was taken to one of these centers. This happened on an autumn day in 1984. At the time, Han was 8 or 9 years old. He and his sister were walking through the city center with their father. However, their father still had unfinished business in town. Not wanting the children to be a distraction, he decided to leave them in what seemed to be the safest place possible, right in front of a police station. But this turned out to be the biggest mistake of his life. As the children waited in front of the police station, a bus pulled up. The officers, after exchanging signals with the man in charge of the bus, forcibly put the children on board. The bus took them to a private facility called the Brothers' Home, a place from which their escape would only come after 3.5 years of nightmarish horror. Naturally, families would turn to the police to search for their missing children. But as you can imagine, asking for help from the very people responsible for their disappearance was utterly meaningless and led nowhere. The Brothers' Home was one of South Korea's largest social welfare centers, located near an industrial area in the southeastern port city of Busan. The owner of this private facility, Park In-kun, insisted that he had established it with the goal of providing food, shelter, and education to vagrants, a so-called comprehensive cleansing. According to regulations, anyone sent to this center was supposed to stay for only 1 year, receive training, and then reintegrate into society. But the reality was entirely different. Many of them were only able to see their friends and families again after 1987, when more than 30 escaped prisoners exposed the horrors hidden behind the center's walls, leading to its closure. The former prisoners of the Brothers' Home revealed that they had suffered from starvation, sexual abuse, and forced labor in the facility's numerous factories, all without receiving any payment. And the punishment for disobedience? Death. Their bodies were then burned, exactly like what we saw in the series. At 5:30 in the morning, you would be woken up by the sound of church bells. Attendance was mandatory, along with the guard screams. You had to memorize and recite religious hymns without any mistakes. If you so much as scratched your body or let your gaze wander during the ceremony, you would be punished and tortured in the worst possible ways. Simply put, these trainings weren't just about words and warnings. They came with physical pain. Every prisoner, or as they called them, rehabilitation seekers, was given daily tasks. For example, you had to carry a specific number of stones or build a certain amount of walls. If you were sick, in pain, or for any reason couldn't meet the target, your punishment was brutal beatings and solitary confinement. Inside, people were tortured with cold water, subjected to relentless beatings, raped by other prisoners, and forced to participate in various games for the guards' entertainment. One of these games was called Hiroshima. In this game, prisoners had to stand upside down on their hands for hours. Whoever fell first was punished and tortured, while the winner was rewarded with the guards' leftover food, just like in the series. Those who planned to escape were often betrayed by other prisoners, hoping to gain favor with the authorities and avoid beatings. If someone successfully escaped, not only was the dormitory leader punished, but every remaining prisoner in that section faced severe consequences. People were brought to the center wearing blue tracksuits, plastic shoes, and numbered uniforms without knowing how long they would be detained. The dormitories were packed with bunk beds, with each bed assigned to 4 people. Daily meals typically consisted of rotten fish and barley rice. One of the most horrifying aspects of these camps was the mixing of adults and minors in shared dormitories. When you wanted to sleep, you always had to watch your back. Another similarity between these centers and the series lies in how deaths were handled. According to leaked documents, after death, bodies were examined and their internal organs were either sold on the black market, cremated, or buried in mass graves. One prisoner, Park Soon-hee, who managed to escape in 1986 at the age of 17, gave birth just a few months later. You can guess the reason yourself. But the real reason behind her escape was even more shocking. The administrators of the Brothers' Home had been forging documents and selling children from the center as adoptees to European countries. She risked her life to escape so that her child wouldn't be sold. Documents revealed that many of the children who were sold had parents outside desperately searching for them. But the statistics were horrifying. In just 1985 and 1986 alone, the South Korean government paid $10 million to the owner of the Brothers' Home as financial aid for housing those who had been rounded up during those 2 years. Just imagine how many people were sent to this facility and how many were killed. An investigation conducted in 1987 revealed that only 10% of those detained were actually vagrants or criminals. Prisoners were forced to work in 20 different factories, including woodworking, metal industries, clothing and shoe production, and even fishing. Many of them were also used for constructing new buildings within the camp, without any choice or pay. The products manufactured in these factories were mainly exported to Japan and Europe, serving as another major source of income for the owner of the Brothers' Home. Even children were forced to work, producing fishing needles that were sent to Japan. If there were any defects in the products or if the quality didn't meet the required standards, your day would end with baton beatings in solitary confinement. According to official statistics, though not particularly reliable, there were 3,128 prisoners in the brothers' home in 1986, and nearly 1 in 5, or 625 people, had died due to the brutal conditions. However, estimates suggest that the real numbers were much higher due to the widespread incineration of bodies. The end of these centers finally came in 1987. A journalist, after gathering information from former detainees, exposed everything in a newspaper article, along with all the supporting documents. This report sparked public outrage and even caught some politicians who had been unaware of the project by surprise. A few weeks later, the police launched an operation, raiding the camp and completely evacuating it. The doors of the brothers' home were shut forever. During this operation, the owner, Park In-kun, was arrested. However, unfortunately, he was sentenced to only 2.5 years in prison, not for murder or torture, but merely for embezzling government funds. After the newspaper report, Park's family quickly transferred his entire fortune, estimated at $100 million, out of Korea and fled to Australia. They established a church and a company, using the money stolen through the torture and forced labor of prisoners. They built a massive family business called JABSA, which is still operating today, run by Park's youngest daughter and her husband. Although Park In-kun died a natural death in 2016, he spent the rest of his life freely in Australia alongside his family. Despite all the evidence, no one was ever fully held accountable for the massive human rights violations at the brothers' home. Even today, some individuals involved in those atrocities continue their political careers. The government has rejected calls for further investigation, and no institution has ever issued an official apology for these events. It is claimed that Squid Game was inspired by this tragedy, matching tracksuits, various games with punishments and eliminations, the rounding up of useless and harmful individuals who were transported to the camp in vans. Most importantly, the fact that no one was ever held responsible for the deaths in either case. These images, which have been circulated online as real photos from inside the camp and bear a striking resemblance to the staircases in the series, are entirely fake and generated by AI. But what do you think? Was Squid Game truly inspired by this horrifying real-life event? Please comment your opinion, and don't forget to like the video. Shadow Puzzle, where every shadow tells a story. Stay with us.